Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So today is again me here, Stefan, with Platforms, and I have a wonderful list of people and partners and friends who are gonna support me on this 1 hour pharma life science journey. So today we're gonna talk about actually user UX, user experience, and we're gonna talk about digital transformation in life sciences, how, like, basically why UX makes all the difference. In fact, one of the guests who is James Harper, he made a very interesting post about this. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce James, who is the founder of 28B. And, it's a very funny name, actually. If he wants, he'll tell us about that. Uh, hey, James, nice to meet you here. How are you?
Hey, Stefan. Very well, thank you. Very well. I don't think I should take up precious time talking about why we're called 28B, but let's just say it was
Mhm.
the name on the door when we set up. Nothing more fancy than that. But I have been creative by creating 28C. Very imaginative to go from B to C. So just missing the A now. But thanks for inviting me on.
Awesome. And you guys have an amazing community, I've heard, in London. So probably should do a conference or something. I would for sure come to London just for your conference.
Well, if you're giving me that platform, 5th of June is our next event, live event, looking at the great content waste in pharma. 77% of content not used by field teams. Very appropriate to user experience, right? If you don't think about how content and tools can be used in the field, then it won't be used. It's all a waste of money.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll introduce our next guest. His name is George. So George has been so like how I try to make the show about being very listening to what people say and being very open to the market and the messages that people say about our show. And then George has been one of the like top contributors, and people who have the voice to people who voice their opinion are they get invited to our webinars. So those who voice their opinions, you guys will get an intro to our podcast, well, webinar. So George is, according to his LinkedIn profile, he's co-creating marketing excellence with business agility. But I'm gonna open the stage for George, and he's gonna do an intro himself. Hey George, how are you?
Hi, Stefan. Hi, everyone. Very nice. So I have helped and I still help organizations that lie at the intersection of consumer health, medical devices, and digital health. And I help them shape global, digital, agile marketing transformation. It's a bit of a mouthful, but actually what we all want to do is to improve patient outcomes through technology and the human factor. So great to be here.
Awesome. Okay. So thank you, George. Well, we're glad to have here a
Thank
contributor.
you.
I have the last but not the least important. His name is Johannes Boschko, and um, what can I say about him? He's a business development director at Dawn Health, and I'm really excited because he was in another episode of ours, like Five for Pharma. He comes from sales, and I'm really excited about this particular episode about Johannes as well, because all of our three guests have a different explanation of what UX means for them, because they all come from different domains, basically. And you know what? I'm gonna invite Johannes here, so he's gonna do his intro himself. Hey, Johannes, get on the stage.
Hey,
Hey.
nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I'm not going to take up too much time. I work at Dawn Health. We work with pharma companies, medtech companies to develop digital health solutions, mostly then end user focused, I think. But yeah, as you said, we're going to have a lot of different viewpoints on the topic. So really excited to be here. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Okay, so let's start. James. So James made a really great post about UX where there is I can share my screen, but there is basically a road, and one road shows it's made out of asphalt, so that's like the official road, and then the other road, which is people basically like tiptoeing on it, and then they made it out of like like dust and dirt, and basically that's the official user experience, and then basically that's the user experience that a solution provides us. So this little pun raises a very interesting question. How do we define user experience, and what does user experience mean for each of you guys in the context of like life sciences, pharma? So the question is for each of you guys. Whoever wants to start can start.
Let me jump in because you mentioned my post. So the post was about desire paths, as they're called, which is despite the best planning or if you put restrictions in place, users will find the way that works best for them. So if you ask me how to define user experience, I would define it by its absence in pharma, which is we shoehorn solutions in and we actually don't really think about not just the user, but all the people around the user. So we might talk about end users and users, etc. But I would say user experience is the emotions and feelings and experience, funnily enough, of interfacing with, using with a tool, a process, a workflow, a strategy, whatever it might be. And we're not very good at it.
Awesome. George, you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go next. So to me, user experience has to do much more with having the interrelationship with the devices, the software platforms, or the interactions at any point in the patient journey. And what I mean by that is that the user is not only the patient, it can be the prescriber, it can be the procurer, the payer, the influencer, the caregiver. So it really is down to how we can solve that problem, and that user experience is a real life problem. Sometimes it is a life or death problem. So we really need to understand the particularity and the context of the pharma sector for that type of experience.
Awesome, thank you. And Johannes, what do you think?
So I'm mostly focused on let's say end users per James' definition. I think for George, I do agree with what you said. I'm mostly thinking about it from an end user perspective. So a physician using an EHR, a patient using a digital health intervention at home, a nurse sort of using a telehealth platform, whatever you want, right? Like I'm thinking of the sort of end users there most of the time. So for me, user experience is about how you can understand how you generate value, how you actually make a difference in that person's world, and how you can make it as seamless as possible, I guess is what I'm saying. So a little bit to what George is saying, make the technology do what the person wants and not having to work too hard to do it. So that for me is a little bit the user experience, but it goes back to, I think, the same principles that the other two shared.
It's interesting what you say there. So I come at this very much with a kind of an internal pharma mindset, right? How do we get our teams to engage with technology better, or to utilize data better, etc. But it's interesting, it struck me there when you were talking about the patient as the end user. It made me think just how powerful user experience is when you think about medicines that are potentially life-saving. People may not continue to take them for reasons, right? In the most extreme case, when I used to work in schizophrenia and mental health, I launched most of the atypical antipsychotics. The side effects that people with schizophrenia got was sufficient enough that they were willing to they were willing to risk their mental health by stopping taking it. There's many reasons around that, but even just antibiotics, right? We stopped taking them after a while. So how important is user experience? It's so important we might risk our own health for it, right? So yeah, I just think it's an interesting insight.
Well, for health in healthcare, but I think we're also used to very bad user experience in healthcare. Let's put it this way: like, how many of us go to their annual checkup and do all the screenings and diagnostics that you could probably get or should get or whatever, just because of how bad user experience in general would be in healthcare, right? And that is like what you said internally in pharma is just a reflection of that, right? It's processes that are not made to be made digital.
Yeah, and if we're asking people to do something they don't want to do in the first place, then user experience becomes even more important, right? If there's actually a really strong reason to do it, you can be tolerant. I think you said this in our pre-event chat, Yannis, that the value exchange. The higher the value, the more you can get away with. Right? Yeah. But then again, user experience is part of the value as well. If you've got a better user experience than a competitor or a different workflow, then that's the one we're going to choose. That's the desire path.
And it has to do much more also from the perspective of the pharma itself. The industry has set up the standards and the frameworks so as for them to serve the patients. But right now they have seen with all this competition in the market that they need to understand and embrace the patient's perspective. So the user's perspective is now much more considerable to do that.
I was lucky enough to be at the Pharma conference over in Philadelphia the other week, and a very strong theme within the Pharmageddon is involving the patient. So unlike a lot of events, there's patients on the stage, there's patients in the audience, and there's a lot of patient engagement specialists in the audience as well from Pharma. And it's not my space, so I find it fascinating learning in that space, and just how important it is to involve a patient in the research and development stage right at the beginning. And they gave examples of, products that got all the way to market as a subcut injection that no one wanted and therefore they didn't use. And if only they'd involved the patient, and they would have rather have taken it 3 times a day or 2 times a day if it wasn't subcut. And instead we hold in our heads that we know best and let the science lead that sort of messaging. So there's another example of how powerful UX can be. And it comes from understanding and engaging, right?
I think there's a classic example. It might have been, actually, I think I know the company, so I don't want to name it, but of the pill being too big to swallow, like not a joke, right? Like an actual pill developed, coming to market, patient feedback is like, I can't swallow it, like I can't get it down, it just doesn't exist, I can't separate it. No, but the way I got introduced to that, James, now that rang a bell, the way I got introduced to it is having talked to a pharma executive running a digital health app, asking me sort of why their solution isn't working. You look at the solution, you're like, I have my suspicions. But what did the patient say? Like, yeah, we didn't talk to the patient. It was too cumbersome. It was too complicated. You're like, that's it. It's not that complicated an answer to the question that you're getting. But that's the way I got introduced to it, and how shocked I got by that level of sort of involving the patient, or at least understanding of how you build user experience.
Guys, I got a question. So one of the people who commented, his name is Phil. Hi, Phil. If you're listening to this, he raised a question about measuring the success of UX improvements, like or UX improvement projects in pharma. So thinking of KPIs of like efficiency beyond like usage rates, NPS, like all of that digital stuff. What KPIs should we be looking at when it comes to user experience?
So I'm going to say, again, end user, I'm going to say you have to replicate what is the intended behavior. So if I want to use something a certain way, if there's a certain business case, if there's a certain specific number that I want to reach, then I have to measure that, right? And that I have to optimize for. Obviously, a UX expert will be able to tell you sort of on how to drive that behavior. But I would say a replication of a specific action within your solution, or a specific action with your solution, is what you want to measure if you actually want to see sort of the KPI, because the usage in itself can be absolutely non-meaning. You can have the highest grossing app in the world. If it doesn't do what you wanted it to do, it is a useless metric. It's a vanity metric.
Okay, I see.
Yes, I agree with Johannes, and it has to do also with the project itself. I mean, you can have the user testing and you can iterate and you can experiment, Phil, and you can see how this can work in terms of objective and key result. And that's the other thing that you can do is not only I understand that as an interface component, but much more as a proxy for business growth and changing the retention and acquisition rates. That's my...
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. I think, Johannes, you nailed it there, right? Which is the user experience isn't the endpoint. We're doing this for a reason. So what is that reason? So when we design dashboards for field teams, the number of clients that say it's a really refreshing approach when I ask the simple question, what behaviors do you want to see from your field team? Instead of what data have we got to display? It's the wrong way around, right? Here's our data, let's just show it. It's actually, what behaviors do you want to see happen and happen more often? And what behaviors do you want to see less? And that's user, like, and that's our endpoint. That's what I would measure. I wouldn't measure. Yes, there's analytics on the amount of usage of the dashboard and all the rest of it, but I don't care if they use it once a week, as long as those behaviors change, then I'm happy.
Yeah.
Pretty valid point. I want to say something controversial. So, 2 years ago, when GPTs appeared, I thought, well, that's sort of interesting, right? You can write with prompts, and then the chat is going to tell you what you want. And now I'm seeing AI being integrated into basically everything, and then I'm seeing the disappearance of UI, of user interface. So what do I mean by that? Before, you would have beautifully made diagrams, beautifully made, like, basically front end, where you would see, as an HCP, you would work with a patient how do you call it, directory, where you would basically interact with the design. And now, I'm seeing that all basically I'm seeing a future where there's going to be no user interface. There's going to be just user experience, where all your pages are going to be basically like a chatbot, and you'll be able to define basically what you want, and you'll be given maybe some extra prompt to start with, but then you're going to design your own user experience based on that, at least digitally. I don't know, of course that's not going to work physically in the physical world, right? But in terms of the digital touch we'll have with pharma, I think that's the future. If you guys want to comment on that.
So to some extent, I'm a little doubtful. I agree with you. Actually, you have to go there. So there's two things that sort of will work against that. I actually think that in a lot of spaces, this will be the case of what you're saying. But there, like specifically in healthcare, there's two things that work against it. That number one is the accuracy of it and like replicating the accuracy. So I don't even want to go into like how accurate the model has to be, but there needs to be some level of control. George mentioned if you want to go into like the medical device territory, that's going to be a nightmare to get that as accurate as you want it to be. Not to mention the fact that a lot of the pharma companies don't even have SOPs to work with generative AI externally. Yeah. So like doesn't even exist yet. So that's the first part on the accuracy. The second part is, and I think James actually mentioned it, although I don't think he intended that specific piece, is there's a lot of things in health applications or in, let's say, in EHR that you don't want to have to prompt to get the information. A lot of times you don't have that much time to actually look at it. So you'd have to look at specifically, hey, right now I'm looking at the screen and I need to have these 3 data points. I do not want to have to ask that chatbot to give me these 3 data points from whatever the data gets from. That's just my perception of it, on why it's going to take a little bit longer and why there's going to be a little bit of a dichotomy.
This is why it's really key to understand what problem you're trying to solve, in what situation, what is the workflow of the end user. So take a car. I don't want to prompt AI to tell me what speed I'm doing or all the rest. The point of the dashboard there is it's immediate, it's right in front of me, it's the bare minimum that I need. That's one use case. But equally, I don't want to need a dashboard when I'm trying to solve a problem with my mobile phone provider. Right? And actually, the better and better those chatbots get, I know they got a bad rep, but if they can solve the problem quickly, that's great. Different use cases, different experience. Patient's a great one that pre-generative AI that Norgene did. Kim sorted this one out, I think, with Earthware, which was a chatbot for people who were due to have a colonoscopy the next day and were told that you need to take this, clear yourself out the night before. And it's quite a scary process, and you have to be like, and you have to do it like in the wee hours of the morning when no one's around to give you advice. It was such a perfect use case for a chatbot, which about an embarrassing problem where you just need some simple guidance to know you're going the right way. Right? Again, really well thought through and a very good application of early algorithmic chatbots.
Yeah.
But I would say, I'm going to have to say it. You've mentioned AI, like we can't, like, bloody hell, everything's about it, right? It feels very snake oily at the moment, very Bitcoiny. There's an AI solution to solve every single problem you think you've got, and I don't think they're solving the problems in the right way. So an example of that might be, I saw a demonstration of how AI can help a rep capture the call report and insights from their sales experience with a customer, right? And the guy started out by saying, why should reps spend 15 minutes creating a call report when our application can help them do it in 5? I don't know a single rep that spends 15 minutes doing a call report. If you're lucky, there's 2 drop downs. Why? We're solving the wrong problem. The problem is they don't believe in the value of that data and those insights, etc. So their user experience for this AI is pointless because they're not going to use it in the first place because they don't believe it, or they'll just use it even quicker to record the bare minimum. Right. So again, thinking what is the problem we're trying to solve, and that's why my definition of user experience is much wider in my space than it is the actual human interface with the application or tool.
It has to do much more with the modernization of pharma after COVID, and that's why then UX has become even much more relevant, and people have become aware of that, like a discipline, like a practice, or like a subset of brand and customer experience. But nevertheless, what we need to understand is that the user centric design of a formulation is the most important part. It's not only about the engagement, but also about the formulation, how we can improve the patient outcomes for that. And I just a quick note on NPS. I would say that NPS is usually a vanity metric because it relies on the claims and on the predisposition of some users to comment positively. And we do know that we gravitate towards giving a positive comment rather than a complaint. So it has to do much more with understanding how we as industry players need to communicate back to the patients, back to the prescribers, that that experience will actually help them and not only be well, but also have a better adherence. And this is really important for the pharma.
Stefan, do you mind if I ask a question? Because I'm not a UX design expert, right? So I'm interested in user experience, but the actual mechanism steps I'm aware of, but I'm not a practitioner, right, at that level. But Johannes, you kind of are, right? So when we talk, we're talking. Oh, you're not. Okay.
Same as you. I can talk about it.
All right. Well, I was gonna ask the panel the question because we're talking about such a wide range of use cases here. From we're talking about whether it's patient engagement or it's HCP engagement, internal, etc. How would you go about understanding the user, the end user, the workflow? What steps would you take for a project? Because I think that's kind of a starting point, right? We might have identified the problem, but we don't quite know where and how to solve it. How would you go about engaging the whatever the target user is?
So for me, that's covering a little bit in it. I'm going to say like the projects, when we create the projects to do these kind of things, we typically have to work with resource constraints and, engagement constraints. In an ideal world, I think I would go in almost like a net fashion, right? Because you'd have to start with something that just that tells you a little bit about the patient. Actually, that could be from an LLM, right? You then have to find sort of in that story, who are the next people to talk to, right? Who do they talk about? I will then talk to these, let's say 5 people. It will be a patient, a physician, another patient, maybe a caregiver, a nurse. Each of them you talk to, and you will again get references to other roles in that same space. So within the same patient journey, you can get there. The key thing, I think, is, right, the fundamental value, and this is what makes user experience in life sciences or in healthcare so much more difficult in a lot of cases, especially like in chronic condition management, is the inherent value that people would want is to be healthy, which you just can't deliver. The ultimate thing that the physician would want is to cure the patient, which they ultimately can't deliver. So you'd have to somehow find these value workarounds, like the value exchange that you said, but you'd have to find the proxies for what is the actual pain point of it, right? And what am I trying to solve for? I think it's similar to probably the way that you would do it, but I would try and first talk about it to as much to understand that, because in most cases where the biggest challenge comes from, in most other sectors, right? Like if I design a solution or a digital transformation for like the retail sector, I'm a customer of things. I can figure this out. I know what the pain points are myself. I do not know what an MS patient goes through, for example, right? So I will never be able to do it. So the first thing is that understanding piece. The second piece is then around refining and consolidating that, playing that back to the people in terms of what you understood and taking that next step and consolidating some of these insights and actually turning them into insights, because most of the time people will complain about a lot of things that actually don't matter to them. And then the third steps is sort of trying to start getting a little bit into the solution mode. I don't want to like define a solution, but like, what if I gave you this? What would happen? What if I gave you that? What would you do with it? Roughly speaking, that's how I would look at it in an ideal world. But I'm gonna be honest, my ideal world would also be very flexible and sort of where it takes me. Because a lot of times, as you said, you might very quickly find out you're solving for the wrong problem, and you were set on the path to solve the wrong problem. It will take you a long time to figure out what problem you're actually solving.
Yeah, from my experience, James, I have helped many businesses, many companies understand the patient journey from pre-consultation to post-consultation period. I have helped them understand the chronic or the rare health condition they are in. And I think through that, you can unlock many different insights around the daily life of the patient, as well as on the pre-planned appointments with the physicians or the nurses. So I usually start with insights, testing, experimentation, iteration, and then we can work alongside the scenarios of how they will want to interact with the specific medication. And we've got also another factor that is not usually mentioned, which is polypharmacy. That means the multiple side effects of using many different pills and medications. This is not usually mentioned, and this is not usually taken care of by the prescribers. They say they prescribe a specific formulation. That's it. So where is the user experience in that? And at the end of the day, if you want to have a campaign and you want to transform the organization by adopting a user-centric view, it's only by understanding the patient himself or herself. It's like, what Hippocrates said was that we focus on the human, and we need to focus far more on the human being rather than on the disease. So that is, to me, that tells me a lot about how user-centric we are already, and we should be in the future.
Hey guys, we got a few comments here. I wanna voice them out. Hey Mauricio, you've been heard. Mauricio's comment is this: in the context of Latin America's regulatory diversity and digital adoption gaps, how can UX in pharma be redefined not only to ensure compliance, but also to enhance patient trust, drive engagement, and generate measurable business impact through real digital transformation? Oh, that's quite a handful. Who wants to take this question? I see. Okay, I see Johannes smiling. So Johannes, you want?
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I think you want to redefine UX to drive patient trust, engagement, and measurable business impact. I mean, it goes back to what James has said, right? It goes back to you need to understand the fundamentals of what you're trying to solve for, right? Like this is not you. I don't know exactly which UX you're referring to in that sense, but trust only comes from transparency and generating value, right? Like there is nothing else. Like you're typically not trusting someone just for the sake of it or wherever. So I don't know what the old definition for you would be, so I don't know how to redefine it. But I think that for me is the key aspect that you'd have to look at.
Well, at least for me, it seems like a double-edged sword, basically, where it says you have way too many goals here, which you wanna achieve with UX. It's like compliance, patient trust, right, George?
Yeah, I can go and I can have a go. Let's say, Mauricio, to me, it has to do much more with understanding and mapping out all the regulatory systems, if you can, in the region, in order to see how this can work. Of course, now AI can help you as well. But if, let's say, you don't use AI, you just need to go from the strictest to the more relaxed regulation. And by doing that, then you are having a better approach to getting the compliance part. Regarding engagement part, it has to do much more, not only with the outreach, but it has to do much more with how you will engage locally. And locally, why do I mean? Why do I say this? Is because although the pharma businesses treat the regions as a regional approach, there is nothing as a regional approach. Usually, each country has its own particularities. If you want to engage the targeted patients or prescribers, you need to talk locally, and you need to have that kind of cultural consideration in your plan. So and I think this has to do with measuring then later on the business outcome. The real digital transformation is usually not an one-off effort. It is an ongoing and iterative effort, and that's why you start small, you test that out, and then you can scale that up. The more complex environment it is, the more need you have. You want for simplicity. You need that kind of simplicity.
Interesting.
I don't have a question I don't have an answer to this one because it's a difficult one, right? You're asking a lot of UX. But the next question, which actually speaks to this, and I think is a better, maybe a clearer way of expressing it, which is from Stefan.
What's Stefan? Hey, Stefan. He's been a guest on this show for many,
right.
Hey, Stefan.
But what he gets to at the end of this is what he's missing is the engagement experience. And the reason I think it talks to the previous question is if we want to build trust with patients and HCPs, it is way more than the website interface. It's way more even than the patient information leaflet or anything it might be. It's the whole experience, it's the whole engagement. And as an example of how bad we are at this, the latest Viva Pulse data shows that 65% of communications with HCPs from the same pharma company is unsynchronized. That means it doesn't reference any other engagement with that HCP. That is throwing stuff at a wall and hoping it fits. And I'll give you a really good example of the worst user experience that I get that drives me up the wall. And we do this all the time as pharma, which is if I'm phoning up to complain about my insurance or to have a problem with my mobile phone, first thing it asks you to do is to input your account number on the touchpad. And then eventually when you get through after the long wait, what's the first thing they ask you for? Your account number, right? And then you go through all of the details and then you tell them your problem and they go, oh, it's for a different department. Like, hang on a minute, I'm gonna have to transfer you. So you have to wait again. And then when you get through to that department, what's the first thing they ask you for? Your account number. And then after that, they say, what's the problem? And it's like, I heard her inputting or him inputting this data. Why can't you see? Why am I repeating ourselves? So that experience in one, if I'm lucky, 30-minute call to have a 2-minute conversation is what we inflict on patients and HCPs over an extended period of time for our lifetime engagement with them, which is, this is what we want to say, not this is what you need to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. I know a few companies who are using like these AI conversationalists, whatever, and I'll be honest, they're doing a better job as support agents actually, because it's just one place. They get your data, comes out of like you upload your data, it uses the data, and then basically answers your question right away, and you can even chat with it. It doesn't have feelings, so apparently things which do not have feelings solve our problems faster than people.
Technology is simple, people are complicated.
Yeah. Do you guys, anyone wants to take Stefan's actually comment, which is there are different experiences discussed. Customer experience as in B2B, consumer experience B2C. user experience technology and brand experience at product and company levels. What am I missing and is the engagement experience when consuming content provided by Pharma? Why should the customer open the door or access a web portal? I don't know, because as far as I know, like HCPs don't open the web portals. And
It's a short answer.
Yeah. Why would they?
They just don't. No, I think it goes back to like why did they ask for did they ask for that message? Did they ask for that information? If you're trying to convince someone, right? That's I mean that I haven't heard that called engagement experience, but I actually like that. If you're trying to convince someone to do something they don't want to do, that's typically relatively complicated, right? It's sort of bad sales if you so want in any case. So I don't know. It's what you said, right? Like I like what James says. Like in the first place, like it's we want you to know this, not I want to know this. So that's the first fundamental principle that just breaks that entire solution.
But equally, we've got to remember that people might not be aware they want to hear this, right? So this comes
Of
back
course.
to the art of storytelling, which I was distressed to see a resurgence in the number of webinars and on-stage discussions on have we lost the art of storytelling. This is a circular thing that we've done as an industry. I've been in this industry 29 years, and this keeps coming back. Why do we lose the art of storytelling? We've got to engage with patients, with HCPs on this story arc and why they should why they should engage with that portal. Why? And honestly, if there isn't a why, then don't bloody build it. Just leave it, save your money, put it somewhere else. But the storytelling aspect, which should be based on the user need, the user experience, meshed with what are the features and benefits of the product that we're launching that solves those problems, or the application that we're doing that, blend that together into story, and then go where the user wants to be, and then they'll open the portal, then they'll log on if that's where they want to be. But I suspect 90% of the time that's still not where they want to be.
This is an excellent use case for, I think George mentioned it, I think that's an excellent use case for chatbots, by the way, right? Because that's this like, it's on my terms, I can do it, and I get the information that I need, and I'll ask you for an update, right? Like very, very honestly, like I think a lot of HCPs will probably benefit from just saying like, what's the latest for this? What's the treatment for this? What is like the latest, what do I do with this kind of complication, right? Instead of calling up 5 pharma reps and figuring out how their stories overlap.
I think what Stefan is trying to say is that although the content is provided by pharma, which is somehow one way, we don't know, and perhaps we won't understand how the prescriber or the physician or the scientist, let's say. So no matter what kind of storytelling we may have, if this kind of storytelling is not backed up by real evidence or clinical trials or this, all this type of stuff, the physician won't be convinced. And this is really key. If we would like to measure the engagement, it does not have to do so much with the storytelling. It has to do much more with staying ahead of the prescriber's mind, that this formulation will actually help him or her prescribe, for the patients and improve the patients' lives. And this is much more important.
Well,
And
I disagree with you, George. I'm going to talk over you and disagree with you because I
yeah,
don't think they're more important. The data is the data, right? You've got your research, your R&D, you've got your clinical studies, you've got your PROs. You can't really change that. What you can do is select the ones that have the most impact and resonate the most, etc. But without the storytelling, why would I look at the science? I think we treat our HCP customers way too treat them not like human beings. They're driven by science and logic, and all they need is the data. Whenever you ask an HCP what their number one influence is, they always say a clinical study. It's always a peer review bullshit.
yeah.
It's not. It's peers. It's the bloke down the road that he knows does this really well, because they're human beings and they get triggered by emotion just like all of us. None of us make rational decisions. We post-rationalize decisions. So I think they're all scientists, white coats, they're driven by, they are, but it's very difficult to get new data. It's very expensive. what we should be doing is telling the story about how this benefits the patient with the data. Obviously, we're not going to tell a story that the data doesn't support. We can't do that from a compliance point of view.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think we overly cost it, or we put our HCPs on a pedestal. My dad was a GP. He doesn't belong on that pedestal when it comes to making rational decisions. I lived with him for too many years to know that's the truth.
No, so I'm gonna say there's an element of trust here, and that's cherry picking the data. So the data is the
Yes.
data, and I agree that. So like in the storytelling, a lot of pharma companies very quickly get pulled into storytelling that is around cherry picking data that is not relevant, and then to your point, right? Then it becomes out very clear, and then it happens what George basically is sort of insinuating, right? Is this like if I cherry pick data because I'm trying to hide data that is technically relevant, but I don't want them to know, then the reputational effects of it, again,
Yes.
not a rational decision,
Yeah.
but then like sort of the storytelling will take over, and in a narrative that you're not interested, it might actually be
But
persuading.
I
So there's
think that
always
happens
this like
less and
relevance.
less. That happens less and less these days.
Possibly.
I think our if we look back, there's been, and I've been involved in some as a rep that was promoting in schizophrenia with a drug that we said didn't have weight gain issues. Oh boy, did it have weight gain issues, right? And that really undermined the trust. That went from the first drug I ever sold that doctors called me to find out more about it and asked me to come in and visit them. That was amazing. That changed my whole view of being a rep. And then 3 years later, you could see this change, and it undermined that fundamental trust. But I think we're better at this than we've been in the past. I think there is a more authentic science-based storytelling, less of the sell advertising.
I don't think you're right. I think of obesity, and I think of bone density and muscle mass being lost, and I'm pretty sure I think we're better at measuring the things that technically are relevant, and then ignoring signals that might not be. But I mean, I might be wrong. Honestly, that's just a hunch. But just to be a little bit provocative, I think there's things here that we might just ignore.
Should we then talk then about the relationship building? It has to do much more with that kind of engagement. The relationship building is much more important than plain storytelling, let's say. We need to have both storytelling and data-backed evidence. And the reason for that is unavoidably because the competition is fierce. I mean, there are many different medicines in the world, around 15,000. So you can imagine all people from the pharma industry are fighting for that attention of the prescriber and or the nurse. So I think we have addressed somehow Stefan's observation.
Yeah, I got for us a question, which is like looking forward. James made the point about water cooler influencers who can make or break a project.
Yeah.
How do we identify and engage these hidden stakeholders in the transformation process? Because like we just spoke about the fact that people don't look into clinical studies actually when your GP might not look in that, but it's like the bloody peers who actually help them make a decision. How do we make sure that these influencers, they're not wrongdoing and they're not influencing whatever they shouldn't be doing? Well,
so this for me is about the walking a mile in someone's shoes, right? We all talked earlier, and George is very and Jan's talking about understanding patients and what they go through, etc. We maybe should extend that to the carers, and then extend that to the nurses, to the receptionists, to the HCPs, etc. Again, my focus is very much internal, but I'll give you an example that when we launch something to the sales team, how often do we think about the influences of the area managers, right? The national sales managers, area managers. Quite often they're part of the training, but are they trained ahead of time? Why would you want to do that? Why? Because if they're not as competent and confident as their team in using something, then they're just not going to push for it to be used or be able to help solve issues and questions and all the rest of it. And we've got to understand who has the ear of our users more than we do. We launch something, and if we're lucky, we'll send out a few emails, right? Our digital transformation in pharma can be as simple as that. And yet, who constantly has the ear of the person that we want to, or people that we want to continue to comply with the process workflow tool, etc. So I think understanding them as part of that ethnography of the user is really important. So who listens and influences them, and then include them in that digital transformation.
Yeah.
Again, it's funny that you brought it around, because I was thinking like, how can I make that relevant for like end users on my side, on just like what examples do I have? But I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think for us, honestly, it happens more often than you think that a solution is rolled out. Like it can be as simple as who's actually typing the data into your EMR, like from a test report or something, right? A lot of people would assume that it's a physician. Sometimes it's the nurse because they just get the report, or a lot of times they're doing the pre-check or whatever. If you forget about them and just ignore them as a user, right, that's like sort of where your influence goes to die. Because we've been in situations where the pharma company, actually it's not us, my previous company, I think, and I've been in conversations with people that promoted the solutions to the physicians. The physicians were on board and wanted to onboard. Nobody trained the nurses. It wasn't the physicians that recommended. The physician said, yeah, please recommend that solution. And the nurse goes in the room and is like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what this is. I have no idea why I should recommend this to you. So here's the flyer. Good luck. Obviously, that is not ideal. And that's sort of where the water cooler influence comes from. But yeah, as James said, I mean, a proper stakeholder map of sort of who is there and who drives your decisions is just fundamental to figuring out how you can get the appropriate behavior.
And that is why we need to have and to build a differentiated value proposition from other companies, so as to include the users as well.
Thank you, George. I got a question. So, Drav, one of his comments suggested discussing the myth about user experience in healthcare that need to be debunked. So one of them was that they look for clinical studies and clinical research. That's one myth. What's another misconception about user experience in life sciences that we think that is holding like companies back?
I'm going to say, so the first one usually is that it's a lack of interest. Most of the time, it's just a replication of, right? Like it's that you don't care. Like the prototypical thing would be like your physician doesn't care if you take your medication. They just, want the money. So technically, like a lot of times you would hear like they don't care about the user experience. A hospital needs to manage itself. It doesn't actually care about how you get in and out. So that's where a lot of it comes from. And then that gets replicated. So I think a bad user experience in a digital way in healthcare most of the time doesn't come from the people don't caring. It's a replication of bad processes. And it's just a digitization of something that didn't work to start with. It just gets more fundamental when it comes to digital because people tend to have different expectations. That's one for me.
What else do you guys think? Any other?
I can give you one from pharma user experience rather than healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. And this is going to be very controversial. We're not always in our daily work driven by improving patient outcomes. Controversial, right? Our whole industry has this on a pedestal. Everything we do is about improving patient outcomes. Sometimes some of us can be a long way away from genuinely improving patient outcomes. And if we dress the end goal of every digital transformation as improving patient outcomes, where in reality it's about a better marketing platform for sending out emails, right? It can feel like a false flag. I think it's really important for us to be honest that mostly for us, whilst that is always front of mind, actually it's about getting home earlier. It's about having that holiday. It's about the promotion. It's about an easier life. It's about earning more money, getting the bonus, being up on stage. And if we don't lean into, and that means the same for HCPs, right? HCPs, especially in the UK, are so time poor right now that if you come in with a solution that costs them time, but might marginally improve patient outcomes, are they genuinely going to go for that? Well, they'll be balancing in their head while other patients might suffer. If you go in and say, there's an initial workload here, but in time, your clinic will, you'll have more room, etc. Got to think about the with him. I know it's an old thing everyone keeps raising, but what's in it for me? What will I get out of this? And importantly, what will it replace? Not add on. There's so much project fatigue and initiative achieve. And if I hear another bloody Project North Star, Project Lightspeed, Project Warp Speed, Lighthouse, and you've got some poor local affiliate trying to juggle all these things, they get the next thing in from global without someone saying, hey, look, there's going to be a bit of work. but in time, this is what it's going to do for you. This is what's in it for you, which means less workload, more holiday time, whatever it might be. And I think sometimes we may put patient outcomes, which is still obviously critical and very important, too far forward when it comes to certain things that we're trying to do in pharma, less in healthcare.
I would say the same thing also though for healthcare. I think that goes back to what like a lot of times you'd have to dealing with the insurance, making your life easier. People are people, right? So I would echo that back to healthcare to some extent as well.
George, do you have an?
Yeah, I mean, it has to do much more with the business context of the pharma organization, which we all understand that it exists as well. It's no question about that.
We have a question from Yash Kumar. It's coming from YouTube. Help me guys figure it out. So he says this: what role does review from different support channels help in the industry like pharma? And I asked him, hey Yash, can you give us more context? He says, like in the e-commerce industry, customer review is very important to understand what user thinks, I guess. But in an industry like pharma, is that important?
Yeah.
Strongly, like for pharma, if I talk end user in terms of a patient or a physician, I'm gonna say that's difficult because of all the functions that need to get involved in this kind of exercise. So that's why I'm almost willing to put my hand in the fire and say, if put to the choice, do we enable a feedback function on this or not? They'd say no because of all the compliance things that it would trigger internally. That's my feeling.
I'll give you an example again from Pharmageddon from the other week. We had a long session on trust, and we talked about the fact that reviews are important for trust, right? And 5-star ratings, all the rest of it. And then as I realized, I got quite passionate about this. I think we do an awful lot of good, sometimes by mistake as part of our promotion, but I think there's a lot of halo like benefits to our industry. I'm very proud of our industry, and I haven't met a single person who isn't trying to do the right thing, right? And yet, when we were listening to the issues that patients have, and don't forget, this is the US, where there's all kinds of issues, and you say it's multifactorial. I had to stand up and say, look, pharma tries really hard. I bet you there's not a group of insurance companies sat down in a room trying to figure out how they can improve things, right? Where are the HCPs gathering to talk about how they can improve their interface with? We beat ourselves up a lot as an industry about how we can do better. We do great stuff, right? But if we really wanted a review from a patient about pharma, it's going to be mostly about the insurance company or trying to access a GP or the fact that they can't get the medication from their pharmacy. My wife has traveled to at least 3 different pharmacies to get one of her medications because there's shortages, etc. And down the line, there might be a supply issue from the pharma company, but it's impossible to narrow healthcare down to review one provider within that. I think HCPs can certainly review an engagement with a pharma company and levels of trust. And I take your point, George, that NPS and the NPS can be a bit of a vanity metric, but at least we can understand how well we're doing that. So I think it's almost impossible to get a review from anyone other than a customer that's in any way meaningful because of the multifactorial nature of healthcare.
And it has to do also with the transparency of data, of review data. Right now, because of the pharma and because of the compliance, it will be very, very unlikely to have this type of reviews from physicians or patients or all together. Maybe they will be heard in the grapevine or in social media platforms, but not so much in an official e-commerce like review. And I think it is a bit dangerous to compare this best practice of customer reviews with those for the pharma.
Well, the closest I've ever got to that was back in the day when 28B used to build apps before we kind of got into field enablement. That's kind of why I started the company. I fell in love with apps. iPhone 3 launched the year before. The App Store was growing. I thought this was great. I thought pharma would love apps. So I set 28B up to supply apps via agencies to pharma, right? So we built the sleep apnea app. We built this app, a diabetes and Ramadan app and all the rest of it. And then they said we'll have to lock the comments off because we can't risk a pharmacovigilance piece. Well, you can risk it. You just have to report it. If we don't open up those feedback channels for where we are directly interfacing with patients, with end users, then I totally take Yash's point, which is, I think we need to overcome those compliance issues. We can't just say compliance, we can't do it. If we genuinely want to learn and improve, but no, every single pharma company, like I told you, you can't turn the comments off in the App Store, right? That's that's part of that feedback. So you can't ignore them. So maybe we shouldn't just say it's a compliance issue. Maybe we should say, how should compliance cover this? How can we allow it for that feedback?
Yeah.
When it is that narrow that we can say this is a service provided directly by the pharma company. Let's say care at home, parental nutrition, a clinic, something where there's that direct line. How can we open up for feedback in a compliant way?
I'm going to say they're not incentivized to do so, right? At the moment, like the real matter of the fact is, like, every molecule, every pharma company has to report how many incidents they have to investigate, right? So as soon as if I have an app and turn on the section and then I have 10 times more incidents because, otherwise it just comes from the pharmacist and from the HCP. Now I can do it every day as often as I want. That's a little bit the incentivization. I do want to say, though, that you have to listen, right? Like, you should definitely have advocacy groups, representatives as broad as possible through as many channels as possible to listen, but that's in sort of a controlled fashion. So I'm totally with you, George, on what you said. Also in terms of actually listening to them and trying to look for that feedback. It's not that we want to shut our eyes. It's just that the normal ways of how you would do it in e-commerce are very difficult in pharma and are really not incentivized.
Yeah. And the other thing also is the health factor, where we are as human beings unique. So everyone has a completely different reaction to a specific formulation, and it is very hard to find patterns. For example, oncology, hematology, or whatever this may be.
Yeah, I agree, guys. So I want to wrap this up. Like, I think we had an amazing session. We had basically questions. What did we learn on this session? And just reflecting before we wrap up. I personally learned on this session that although we think about like pharma and GPs as like some really mindful and like put them as exemplary citizens, they still look into peer review is the strongest motivator out there, and there are still people who can be influenced. The fact that the other thing that I learned is that when people say pharma and pharma gives a bad UX, it's not the actual pharma, because pharma cannot influence the drug that they've run out of the drug in this retail store. Although in the retail store, in the pharma store, I don't know, 50 miles from here, they still have the drug, right? Pharma cannot influence a lot of these things, and yet pharma gets a lot of negative rep, even though there are things out of its control, right? And the same I can say about healthcare. So these are a few things that I learned today, or at least are on the top of my head today. Do you guys want to highlight something?
I've got one. I always speak first, right? I can't help myself. So silence was about 10 seconds silence. Had to jump in. I can't help myself. It was something that I'm going to use. So I just want more people to walk in the shoes of their end users and their users and their water cooler influencers. Like, if you're going to design content for the field, go on field visits. Understand what it's like to be out there. And I'm going to use what Johannes helped open up in my head, which is, user experience for taking medication. We might sacrifice our health if the user experience isn't great. That's how important user experience is. So if we want people to do something that's a bit more hard work or a different way of doing, we have to really, really understand them and make sure what we're designing and how we're doing it is optimized for their experience.
Awesome. George, Johannes, do you guys have anything highlights, or you guys all knew all of this?
No, let George go first.
To me, it has to do much more with UX, that every single company has its own needs and requirements, and we need to understand and define that accordingly. Regarding digital transformation, obviously, it has to do also with considering the end user as well as the other users, for sure. And what I can gather and take away from that discussion is that we have to be much better relationship builders with our users, and we need to understand how it is in the life of the patient, of the caregiver, of the healthcare professional, and so on and so forth. And I have to say that the user experience in the pharma has to be still responsible, compliant, accountable, particularly because of technology, because of Internet of Things, because of privacy and data consent. We haven't addressed this, but right now, particularly with AI, for example, the agency of that user experience is really key for us to understand how we will shape that, not only now, but in the future.
Awesome. Johannes?
I'll go last very quickly. I've never thought about sort of the what I consider user experience, so the end user experience and the parallels that are drawn to like digital transformation and the entire transformation that goes on with that. So I'm going to look more towards those projects also to learn from that. So that was the key takeaway. For whatever reason, I'd never thought about that. So thank you definitely, Stefan, James, and George.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you, guys. Thank you for the great session. Thank you for staying with me after work and listening to all this blah blah. I hope our listeners have enjoyed this session. We had 160 something people registered for the webinar. Hope they will enjoy it afterwards. Wish you guys a great evening and enjoy the rest of the day. Right?
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Stefan.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George, Johannes. Bye, guys.